right, welcome to yet another episode of the Environmental Perspectives Podcast Legacy Bakers Edition. We are in Molly's Kitchen, 705 Tilton Road in Northfield. What did we just introduce? You can do anything.
I just interviewed Dr. DeHaan.
And who was that?
She is basically a scientist, female in STEM and administrative. She was everything.
Now, what kind of things you guys talk about?
Talked about her life growing up in education and how she had to deal with all the difficulties of being in a minority group in the science education.
That's awesome. Again, we are here on location at Molly's Kitchen, 705 Tilton Road in Northfield. Shout out to Molly for allowing us to be here. Some great sandwiches and things behind us. What did you guys do? All right. So, sit back and enjoy this episode of Legacy Bakers Edition.
Good afternoon, this is Simone, and I'm here with Dr. DeHaan today. And I'm going to start off by, you just introduce yourself. I know, you do so many things. You're an administrator, you wrote a book, you're a scientist, too. So, tell us all about that.
Okay, well, I actually started my career off in the private sector. So I was a forensic scientist for years. I was an environmental chemist. But I had a very deep concern about minorities and females in science and the lack of minorities and females in science. So I changed careers and I entered education. So in the education field, I worked as a teacher for about 8 to 9 years in the classroom. And then I became an administrator. I was a vice principal. Then I worked for the state. And then now I am retired, but I do a lot of consulting. But my educational background is that my undergraduate degrees are in chemistry, biochemistry, and mathematics.
Oh, wow. That's smart.
Thank you. Then I went into forensics field. And then I went back to school and I had 2 master's degrees. One is in curriculum and instruction and one is in educational leadership. Then I went back to school again and I got my doctorate in organizational leadership where I specialize in English language learners, which was the whole premise of my book.
Yeah, that's a lot of education. I could never.
Yes, you can.
So tell us about your background. You knew you wanted to study forensic science and stuff like that, and you knew that you wanted to help minority groups. What led you to that?
Oh, when I was growing up, and even still today, it hasn't changed very much, unfortunately. But that people don't see females as scientists. They don't see minorities as scientists. And unfortunately, when you grow up in low-income communities, those schools, unfortunately, don't always have those kind of courses. There's this thing called the leaky STEM pipelines. And in order for kids to make it into the STEM fields, they have to start early, in elementary school, early with science and STEM and have that exposure. But a lot of low-income communities don't have that kind of offerings, right? Unless they are doing something where they have to pay. In low-income communities, you're not going to have that $800 for a summer camp or $1,000 for a summer camp, or even to do after-school programs that are offered in your community. So what I wanted to do, because I grew up low-income with just my mom, so I really wanted to make a difference with kids and give them the exposure. So that's why I started a nonprofit organization where I offered after school and summer programs in STEM. Then I went into training teachers so that they can understand how to teach children, right, to keep science interesting.
Yeah.
But I had such a hard time because when I was in school, they didn't want me in those classes, right? So where I grew up in Bergen County, we moved to a town where we were the only Black family in the town, which means I was the only Black student in the entire school district. And they didn't want me in any of those advanced classes. And so it got to the point that my mother had to actually threaten them with an attorney in order for them to place me in the first classes. So one of the things that I promised myself was that soon when I had the opportunity that I wanted to do something to help promote Blacks, minorities, low income, and females in the science. And that's how I ended up in the field.
That's so interesting. That's so nice. Now, so you're the only colored person in your school or in your program. And were you the only woman in there too?
Yeah, when I was in high school, of course, it was just me because we were the only minorities in the retired community. But when I went to college, I went to Rutgers University with Douglas College at the time. So it was Douglas College as a part of Rutgers University. There was really only a handful of us who actually were chemistry majors. I think it was myself and another female. So there was just two, but I was the only African American. And it was pretty rough because even, unfortunately, I'm hoping it changed now. But even then, you were discouraged, right? So when I declared my major, which I was a triple major, chemistry, biochemistry, and mathematics, my counselor was more like, well, why don't you try something like med tech?
Yeah.
Because I had a hard time, right? I was the first one in my family to go to a four-year college, so I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know what to do. I did not know how to study, right? So instead of encouraging me and finding outlets for me in order to do better in school, to really understand this, it was more like, why don't you find something easier, right?
Like discouraging.
Yes. So my concern is how many other minorities, how many other females are being discouraged from going into a field just because they hit a bump in the road, right? Because I hit a bump in the road.
Yeah.
Okay. But I needed someone to encourage me, not someone to say, oh, you hit a bump in the road, you find something easier. Because my question would be, would you do that to someone who's not a minority? Right? Or would that conversation have been different? So that's the whole premise behind everything that I do.
Yeah, that's amazing because I know how hard it is, especially for people like my age and like women of color. I know that I like stop myself almost every day from doing some things I love just because I'm like scared, like, oh, do they really want like a colored person doing this or like a female doing this? So that's amazing.
Yeah, and you have to get used to and you have to get comfortable with being the only one in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to. Like engineering and tech, you'll find a lot of men in that field, right? Males in that field. There aren't that many females. So what I had to do was, number one, I had to get used to being the only minority in the room. I had to get used to being one of a few females in the room. I had to stand up for myself when I felt that I was being graded more harshly. So don't let that discourage you. Just understand where you're heading, and you have to stand up for yourself because you have a right to be at that table, right? You have a right to be at that classroom because you have a contribution. So do not be discouraged.
Yeah. Now, I know that must have been really hard for you to like stick up for yourself and just to be the only like person in the room who like knows your full potential. So like, can you like tell us some ways to like how you got past that and like how you just like broke that barrier, like especially in your mind, like with all these people saying like you can't do it and you had to tell them that you could?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie and say that I didn't sometimes feel defeated, right? That I wanted to quit, but that was my passion. That's what I like to do. And I think what also helped prepare me was that when we moved in Bergen County, so we moved from a town called Englewood to a town called New Milford, right? And I experienced, for 12 years old, the ultimate racial prejudice, right? So I think that really helped me when I got to college to be able to say, this is just a continuation of what I experienced when I was in New Milford.
Yeah.
For instance, they didn't want to put me, as I said, in any other higher classes, right? But they would give me the books. They would keep me in the low class, right? I was followed home by white kids, like 20, 30 deep, all the way home. Here you are. You know, you're walking by yourself home because you don't have many friends, right? So, and they're following you home, right? My mother was putting a pool into the house, but we had to keep our dog out because the neighbors were going to threaten to do a acid in our pools. We had to leave our dogs out to make sure that no one would come onto our property. So I think all of those things, and I was there from 12 to 17, right? 6th grade through 12th grade. It kind of made me, I'm not going to say get used to it, but to understand that you're not wanted, right? But I had a really strong mom, God rest her soul, who just said, you stick to it. You know, you can do this. And she was the ultimate of support for that. So when I got to college, I was like, okay, Darlyne, I'm going to deal with it again. But I had to stick up to myself. I had to stick up to professors who wrongly graded me. And I'll give you one instance. So I was in inorganic chemistry. And this one gentleman, was a white guy, he didn't do the lab. He didn't do any of it. So it's like, Darlyne, can I please cover your lab? I can't afford not to fail this or anything. So I'm like, no problem. So I gave him my lab. He copied my lab verbatim. He got a 98. I got a 47.
Wow.
Yeah. So that made it very clear to me that this inorganic teacher, which I knew anyway, didn't care for me. So I had to go up to her. And I told the guy, I go, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to tell the teacher what just happened because it was my point to prove that you are harshly grading me for not on my ability, but on some type of prejudice that you have, some type of bias that you have. So when you're in this situation, you have to stick up for yourself, and it is not.
Yeah.
It's not pleasant. It's not a pleasant experience.
Yeah, and it's terrible that we still somewhat have to go through these where we're like, as female and colored people, we're still like underestimated and still have to prove ourselves every single day.
Yes, very much so. And even, for the black males out there, right? So I have an older son, and he went through a really rough time in school because a lot of the teachers, especially I always remember his higher level math teacher, didn't want him at all. So whatever bias she had it, but she had to have a come to Jesus meeting, right? And it ended up being in front of the superintendent, in front of the principal, in front of the guidance counselors, because she was targeting my child and she was grading my child martially. So when I saw everything that he was going through, it brought back memories of everything that I went through, right? So I had to support him. So, and I think black males even have it worse than us as black females because they're already looked at through this lens of being aggressive. You know what I mean? So I had to deal with that part all over again. So when you have something that you love or something that you want to do, you don't have to get an A, right? Or A's are nice. You don't have to get an A. You have to have perseverance. And if it's something you want to do, you have to put in the extra time so that, unfortunately, like my mother said, you have to be 10 times as good as the non-minority student to get the same level of appreciation. So that's something that you have to realize. You have to work hard. Mm-hmm. So you can't say, why did Johnny get it? We have to realize, okay, Johnny got it because he has an asset, right? I don't have that asset. So I'm going to have to work harder just to get the same respect that Johnny had.
Yeah.
Not that it's right, but that's what it is.
Yeah, it's the world we live in.
Yes.
But I can tell it's very clear how hard that you worked throughout your whole school and your whole adulthood too, because you even wrote this book not too long ago. Yeah. So what inspired you to write this STEM book?
Well, it's a kind of like a accumulation of everything. Number one, I never thought I would write a book.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all. So one of my mentors, Dr. John Kellmeyer, who I did my doctorate program with, he kept saying, number one, he's the one who actually told me to go to STEM because I was going to go another route, right, for some instructional strategy. But I also had an interest in STEM. I had an interest in multilingual learners because my husband is a multilingual learner. So he was like, Darlyne, you really need to go with L's, STEM with L's. That's going to be the future. So I ended up going that route. So when I finished my doctorate, and he went to me and he said, you need to write a book. We need to write a book based on your experiences. You need to write a book as to how we teach general education STEM because it'll help promote STEM, right? Because right now with STEM, only the brightest kids get in, or they have all of these requirements to get in, or they say you have to have a certain level of language proficiency to get in. But there's a way that you can teach STEM to kids who don't speak English. Yeah. And to me, it is a job of educators. It is a job of the Department of Education. It is a job of education to equip the teachers so that all students have an equitable opportunity. And that's not happening with else. And so that was the birth behind the book. STEM is for everyone. And so Dr. Kellmeyer really was the reason that I went for the book to write it. And I'm glad I did, but it was an experience. It took me about 2.5 years to write the book. There's a lot of other research that I had to do, but I'm really glad that I did. And I'm just hoping that it makes a difference for educators, for the general education teacher, and for teacher education programs, for them to realize it's their responsibility to make sure that all teachers who go through an educational program are trained to teach else. Not a special track, not an urban education track, not a multilingual learner track, not a special ed track. That there should be core classes that are required for every person who enters an education program, and that need to include how to teach L's and how to teach special ed.
Yeah, that is amazing. You're really focused on the education for kids and just making sure that they grow up and with the right education and everything. Even you said you started a nonprofit group. Yeah, what do you do with that?
Well, we just closed it actually. This year I just stopped with nonprofit, but I started with the nonprofit because that way schools wouldn't say that, oh, we don't have the funding, right? So I'm like, if I can have a nonprofit where I'm getting funding from businesses and organizations and companies, then I can say, hey, I want to bring this to you, but it's not going to cost you anything.
Yeah.
Right? Or I can offset it by this amount so that it'll be a lot more affordable.
Yeah.
So when I first started doing it, I actually did my first stint in Atlantic City Public Schools, with their after school program, my board in the science program.
Yeah.
And they really supported me a lot between after school programs and summer programs in an effort to really try to make a difference. So when I entered the education field, right, as an alternate router, all of those things I brought with me. So every district that I was involved with, I brought in some aspects of STEM and how do we teach STEM to teachers who want training. Because teachers I truly believe all teachers want all of their students to be successful. But we can't put them in a classroom with a population that they have no idea how to teach because they were never trained on it, but yet hold them responsible for how those kids do in their class.
Yeah.
So that's the whole purpose.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah. And I know there's many teachers or like not teachers, just like adults in general, they will be like, oh, well, it's like the students' fault because they're not like really wanting to learn about it. But I think that with like books like these and all the stuff that you're doing, it's really teaching more kids about like STEM and like science in general because I know for myself, I know like absolutely nothing, but I definitely think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think if we make it, and that's the thing. So that's one of the other reasons why I started a nonprofit, because science, the way that they saw it from the private sector, right, was it's gone and it's dry. It's what I call recipe science, right? Like you put in a gram of this and add this and then see what happens instead of saying this is a situation, these are the challenges, these are the restraints I'm going to give you, how can you solve this problem? So when you make it something that's real life that kids can apply, and you're going to increase their engagement, right? If you want to increase multilingual learners, then you want to make sure, number one, you have to know about your multilingual learner, right? You have to know something about them and their background. You have to know their level of language proficiency. So therefore, you can modify STEM challenges so that all students can be engaged in to make sure that it's not something that other students not going to know anything about because it's not part of their culture.
Yeah.
So they have to know their students, but you have to make it real world. You have to make it authentic. You have to allow the students to what they call productive struggle. You have to have that communication. But when you just give this recipe, do all of these things, fill in questions, write a summary and a conclusion, that's not exciting, right? That's not exciting. So you have to be able to make it exciting. So in the book, we have about 4 STEM challenges, and I created 6 fictitious students using AI. Each of them has a different background, of language proficiency. So I put them in these imaginary classrooms so that the teachers can see how you take this STEM challenge and modify it now for this student who is a level 3. How you modify it for a student who's a level 6. And then how can that work and how will that look in your classroom? So it's really hands-on, it's really authentic, and hopefully people will get a lot out of it.
That is amazing because that's just showing how you're not limiting all science to one specific group of people because especially with like the what's the word I'm looking for or the generation now where it's always like, oh well, science and like engineering and stuff like that is mainly for guys and males, and it's like, well, since I already know I'm not going to fit into that, why even try? Right. The way that you're teaching it.
Yes, because we have to stop that way of thinking, right? But I think, as I said before, girls, minorities have to get used to the fact that I might be the only one in the room. Yeah. Okay. And here's a prime example. So I just had a wonderful opportunity for the U.S. Department of State to go to Saudi Arabia. So I went to Saudi Arabia in November to work with their post-secondary college, Princess Nora University, and working with and training their teachers on how do you teach STEM when English isn't your first language, right? So I was also one of the keynotes. So they had, I think 6 keynote speakers. So here I am in Saudi Arabia, like I'm floored, number one, that I even made it there, right? And then I'm walking down the hallway with all the other keynotes. And I had to check myself, right? Because I'm saying to myself, Darlyne, what in the world are you doing here, right? Because once again, I was the only one in the room. It was the only African American, not the only woman. There were a few other women, but I was only African American, right? So I'm like, I had to actually tell myself, you deserve to be at this table. You earned it to be at this table. And so that's why I'm saying to the young ladies and young students now, understand that you deserve to be at that table, but to also understand you might be the only one that looks like you at that table, and that's okay. That's okay.
It's definitely something that I myself need to get used to for sure, especially being in like more advanced classes and there's not as many diversity.
Yes. Yep. And unfortunately, that's the case. So the question becomes why, right? Why do we not have a lot of minorities or females at these higher level classes? I mean, that becomes a major question, right? And then when you talk about STEM, if the students have not had that experience, that pipeline experience, then they're going to get to high school and they're not going to have the wherewithal to be able to be in those classes because they haven't had those experiences. And especially girls, if girls haven't had that STEM exposure, that positivity exposure to them, we lose most girls in 7th grade. Do you know why? Boys. That's why. Number one, they don't think smart girls are cute, right? And so they don't want to be the smart girl. So they kind of dummy themselves down, so that they won't be labeled as that smart girl. So all those 7th graders who are out there, or 7th grade girls who are out there, they want you beautiful. You're going to be beautiful and you're going to be smart and you can do STEM. So don't let that deter you. Do not let that deter you.
Yes. I think that is definitely 100% true. And I also think that it helps a lot to have like somebody who's there and who actually loves like what they're teaching and stuff.
Yes.
Like, it's so obvious that you love STEM and you love like teaching and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also you said that you were an administrator too.
Yes.
Were you a teacher? You said a vice principal?
Yes. So I was a vice principal because I always thought I wanted to be a principal, right? So I thought I wanted to run a building. Yeah. So I started, of course, in teaching. And then I went to the New Jersey Department of Ed, where I was an instructional specialist. So I got to see more of the administrative side. So then I said, okay. So then from there, I was a supervisor. I was a supervisor of STEM. But then I said, you know what? I want to run a building because I felt if I ran a building that I could implement programs, I could have a little more control over my building. So then, but you have to go through this process. So I was a VP for a while, a vice principal for a while, and I really did like it, but I was more into discipline than into curriculum. Yeah. So that's when I realized, okay, if this is what a building administrator's job is, then that's not what I want to be. And so I think I was a VP for 4 years. And then I said no. So then I decided curriculum and instruction is where I want to be. So then I left and went back into curriculum and instruction because you control the curriculum, right? So you can have it written and implement things that allowed me to more hit my goals than I could as a building administrator. But that I just learned that wasn't based on my goals. A building administrator wouldn't get me to reach that goal. And that was to make a difference in STEM.
Yeah. Now, my question for you is, was it harder to be an administrator rather than to be a student? Because being a student, you said how like the students and the teachers underestimated you and stuff, didn't really take you seriously. But I know that being a teacher, the kids could not take you seriously and just like not even pay attention to anything you're saying.
Yeah, I think as an administrator, unfortunately, there's not a lot of minority administrators. Yeah. So that's a concern. Okay. Yeah. I think that students need to see administrators that look like them. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a school that has a high minority population, you should have some of the minority administrators. Okay. But unfortunately, whether what's happening along the way as to why they're not on that career path or are they being discouraged right, not to do it, or are they just not being picked, right? So they're going for the interviews, or are they not being selected? And that's a question, and that's a concern.
Yeah.
Because I know people who want to become administrators, right, who are minorities. And I hear a lot of times them telling me, oh, they'll never pick me, like I'll never get it, or I went on all these interviews and they're not picking me. So I think we really need to look at that aspect, and that's the same way I look at STEM.
Mm-hmm.
STEM, people involved in STEM should mirror the world and the population in which you live, right?
Mm-hmm.
Administrators, schools and administrators should mirror the population of the students of which they have, because students need to see themselves in those they look up to. But if you are a minority student and all you see are people who don't look like you, then you're going to be like, wow, why are we not being represented, right? Maybe this is not something that I can do. So I prided myself on being the administrator that kids can look at and see someone who looks like them. When I do professional development, because I do a lot of professional development, I like being that minority female up there for them to see, yeah, we belong at this stage, right? We can do this. So I proudly do my professional development and my consultation as an African American female, because they need to see what we bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's crazy too, because I know there's like, especially now, there's like a shortage of teachers, and there's still like many minority groups that are getting.
Yeah,
and it's crazy because I know, especially in my school, I can name maybe like 2 Black teachers. Like,
yes.
And it is very discouraging because it's like, who am I looking up to, really?
Yeah, where are they, right?
Yeah.
And one district that I worked in, there was one Black teacher, period.
Yeah.
In that school. At the other school that I was at, I don't think there were any. So, they're not, that representation is not there. And the studies have shown that 70% of teachers are middle-class white females. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. So they're being in schools that are 80% minority, right? So we need to figure out why, like what's happening, and we need to change that dynamic. We need to change why that's happening, right? Because even though I believe that everyone has implicit bias. I have them, you have them, everybody has them, right? But you have to be able to identify them. And as teachers, you especially need to be able to identify that, because it could come out, but you're not even understanding it's coming out in what your belief system is. So if you grew up in a community that had this negative or looked at minorities through this deficit lens, you might not intentionally mean to do that, but chances are you are.
Yeah.
So you really need to be able to ask yourself, what are my implicit biases? Now they're in a stage right now with a lot of things happening in the current political climate that we're in. I think it's that much more important now for us to acknowledge what implicit biases we have. Am I looking at Darlyne, for instance, through this, oh, she can't do this, right? And then when she does do it, am I shocked that she was able to do it, right? They call it cognitive dissonance. And that's when something's happening that your brain is telling you, hey, that's not supposed to happen. So when you have this minority female student who's doing something really great, you're like, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? This is not supposed to be happening. So those are the implicit biases that educators need to be able to address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think it's very important for educators and just adults in general to be able to adjust and change their mindset as the world changes, because obviously there's many things like with this generation that is changing, and like it's I think it's harder for us to learn and to understand the world when people are saying like, oh no, that's not right, you need to do this, and like everything is just like black and white.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the process needs to change. The kids growing up are very different. They're exposed to a lot more. We cannot continue the same way. There has to be changes that are made. Yeah. We have to find out what can we do to really engage these students. How do we maintain this engagement of these students? Because the generations now are from instant gratification. That cell phone gives you instant gratification, right? So I think we need to look at things differently. We need to look at things differently as to how we're using cell phones. We need to look at things differently for AI, artificial intelligence. Some schools are adamantly against it. No, we need to embrace it, but we just need to understand the ethics behind it and to be able to implement it ethically.
Yeah.
But not to say, no, we can't, because then it's going to become the haves and the have-nots, right? Same thing when we had Corona. Schools that didn't have one-to-one, schools that didn't have enough technology, those students fell behind the worst. And we're still trying to recover from that. So that really brought a lot of attention to the inequities, and that from the poor schools, right? From the wealthy schools. So, and if you don't do something with AI, that's going to happen again. The kids at schools who are like, no AI, never. They're going to be at a disadvantage when they go into the workforce.
Because the world is just changing so much, and it's changing so fast too.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for joining us this episode. I know that we're very new to this. I'm very new to this whole podcast thing, so thanks for adjusting to me. And yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. You keep up the good work, and I hope to see you even bigger.